The starship Eventide did not travel. It lingered. It was a needle of dark, matte alloy, suspended in a sea of non-light. A smudge against the perfection of an empty cosmos. There were no engines, for there was no direction. No running lights, for there was nothing to see. No sense of motion, for the very concept of movement had become an antique memory. A quaint notion scribbled in logs no one read anymore. The Eventide existed in a state of perpetual, profound stillness. A cathedral of silence adrift on the tide of decaying reality. Generations had lived and died within its alloy ribs. Though the words, lived, and died, had long since shed their original meanings. The crew, numbering exactly 3,402 souls. A figure that had not changed in a time beyond measure. Did not age in the conventional sense. Their bodies, sustained by a reticent, self-replicating biogel that pulsed through the ship's veins instead of blood, were ageless. Their minds, however, were not. They were reservoirs, libraries, and crucibles. Their purpose, passed down not through data files but through osmotic ritual, through dream sharing and synaptic echo, was to remember. And not just to remember, but to sculpt. Eventide sailed through the dusk of existence. That was the closest word for it. Dusk. Not the end of day, but the long, slow sigh after the sunset. The deepening blue that bleeds into purple, then into a black so complete it feels less like an absence and more like a presence. This quantum state dusk, a bubble the ship maintained around itself, was a place where the laws of physics grew soft at the edges. Time did not flow in a line. It pooled, eddied, and sometimes seeped backwards like a tide through porous sand. Entropy, the universe's great leveler, was not a relentless force here, but a malleable medium. And the human mind, particularly the mind of a sculptor, could, with immense concentration and terrible sacrifice, push against that medium and shape it. Stood in the atrium, the ship's hollow heart. It was a space so vast its ceiling was lost in a perpetual, self-generated haze, like the sky of a world none of them had ever seen. The air thrummed with a low, sub-auditory frequency, the bone song of the Eventide itself. Before her, suspended in the center of the cavernous space, was her current work. It was not made of metal or light or holographic data. It was made of memory, probability, and will. Not just any tree. It was the memory of a gnarled, ancient oak that had stood at the edge of a meadow on a planet called Earth. A fact she knew not from experience but from the collective, fading dream pool of the crew. She was sculpting its bark. Knot by knot. She didn't use her hands. She used the focused, quiet desperation of her consciousness. Her mind a chisel of pure attention. The memory image was hazy, unstable. It flickered between solid wood and a cloud of probabilistic dust. Her job was to make it insist on being real, to anchor it in the dusk, to give it a weight, a history, a texture so specific that the universe's creeping indifference could not dissolve it. Sweat beaded on her brow. A physiological anachronism. The effort was psychic. A grinding of her soul against the inertia of unreality. She fed the sculpture with sensory fragments. The cool, damp smell of moss on the north side. The precise, abrasive texture of the lichen. The hollow sound a woodpecker's labor made from deep within the trunk. A sound she had conjured from a third-hand memory song hummed by an old archivist with each detail. The oak grew more stubbornly present. The air around it began to smell of damp earth and decaying leaves. A scent so alien and powerful it made her eyes water. 147th Captain Sculptor of the Eventide. Her title was not one of command, but of burden. She held the oldest, deepest, and most perilous memories. The memory of Earth's oceans. Not just their sight, but their sound, their taste, their immense, terrifying pressure and their life-giving rhythm. She held the memory of a yellow sun's warmth on skin. A sensation so complex and data-rich it took up a significant portion of her cognitive architecture. And she held the secret. The terrible, beautiful, fragile secret of their voyage. They were not explorers. They were refugees from a flaw, called the cradle flaw, or sometimes the Genesis crack. The foundational theories were gone, lost in the first great memory purges. But the core truth remained. Their original universe, the one that birthed Earth and stars and life, had a defect in its fundamental code. A creeping nullity. Not an expansion into nothing, but an unraveling from the edges inward. Existence itself was being slowly, perfectly, erased. Not by an enemy, but by its own inherent instability. Like a tapestry whose first, flawed stitch guaranteed its eventual, total dissolution. Eventide was the escape pod. Not from a place, but from a state of being. Its creators had not built it to outrun the flaw. That was impossible. They had built it to sidestep it. To exist in this quantum dusk. This borderland between is and is not. Where the unraveling could be held at bay. Postponed indefinitely by constant, diligent acts of creative remembrance. The ship was a lifeboat sailing on a sea of entropy. And every sculpted memory was a patch on its hull. A bale against the void. Ilara finished the oak's lowest branch, feeling the memory settle into place with a soft, mental click. The tree was now an anchor. It would hold a tiny piece of the Eventide's local reality stable for a time. Perhaps a century. Perhaps a millennium. That was the economy of their existence. Sculpted memories bought them time. Time to remember more. To sculpt more. To stave off the end. Back. Her metaphysical muscles screaming. Around the atrium. Other sculptors toiled at their own stations. Kale was working on a complex memory of a snowflake's crystallization. A dizzying fractal of cold perfection. Lyra wrestled with the scent of a long-extinct flower. A fragrance of pepper and honey that kept collapsing into the smell of ozone. Their works glimmered in the dusklight of the atrium. A forest of phantom trees. A ghostly mountain range. A shimmering, half-formed river that flowed upwards. The air was thick with the psychic residue of their labor. Phantom sensations. Emotional echoes. The taste of forgotten fruits. Lara moved through the forest of memories towards the archive. Her footsteps, absorbed by the resonant floor, made no sound. The archivist, an ancient figure named Silas whose body was more biogel than flesh, waited for her. His chamber was lined with crystalline data cubes that held not digital information, but compressed sensory imprints. The raw material of memory. The oak is stable, Alara reported. Her voice a dry whisper in the quiet. Silas nodded. His eyes milky pools. A strong anchor. It tastes of resilience. It will serve us well. He gestured to a pulsing amber cube. The Council of Echoes suggests a new focus. The memory of laughter. Unprompted. Joyful laughter. It is fading from the pool. Laughter. Ilara felt a pang. She held the concept of laughter, the social and neurological data of it, but the raw, unadulterated feeling of it, the convulsive, air-stealing, tear-inducing reality of it, was slipping away. It was becoming a schematic, not an experience. an emotion without a specific instance, she said. Then you must find the instance, Silas intoned. Dive deep, Captain. Past the personal archives. Into the racial sediment. Laughter is a fundamental weapon against the void. We must not lose it. Diving deep was the most dangerous part of a sculptor's work. It meant quieting one's own mind, lowering the mental shields, and sinking into the collective unconscious of the crew. The vast, turbulent, often chaotic sea of inherited memory fragments that spanned generations. It was like diving into a stormy ocean where the waves were made of other people's dreams, traumas, and joys. In her quarters, a Spartan cell with a single, dormant viewscreen that showed only the uniform, unbroken dusk of outside, Ilara prepared. She lay on her resonant slab, a surface that hummed in tune with the ship's bone song. She closed her eyes and began the process of dissolution, of letting her, Ilara-ness, soften at the edges. The world of surface thought fell away. She sank. First came the personal echoes. The ghost feeling of a hand in hers. Whose hand? The taste of a sour berry from a childhood she never had. The frustrating, half-remembered solution to a mathematical problem. These were the flotsam of her own mind. Her own inherited memories. She let them drift past. Deeper. Now she was in the generational stream. Memories of the eventide itself. The panic of the first generation. The clang of construction that was really deconstruction. They had built the ship from a dying world. Not on it. The solemn, terrifying ritual of the first sculpting. The memory of the last sunset. Seen from a crumbling orbit. A sunset that did not promise a dawn. Deeper still. Darker. Thicker. This was the racial sediment. Pre-eventide. Earth memories. But they were not clear visions. They were sensations without context. Emotions without story. The crush of a crowd. The ache of loneliness in a teeming city. The blinding joy of a first kiss. Hopelessly entangled with the searing grief of a final goodbye. It was a symphony of human experience played on broken instruments. She was looking for laughter. She sifted through the sediment. She found triumph, which was sharp and metallic. She found love, which was warm and porous, like sun-baked stone. She found fear, a cold, slick oil. And then, she felt a ripple, a buoyant, effervescent, ascending sensation. It was trapped under a heavier layer of grief and fatigue, like a bubble struggling to reach the surface. She focused on it, gently pulling it free. It was not a single laugh, but the essence of laughter's birth. The memory scene formed around her, fuzzy and impressionistic. A pre-dawn kitchen, warm and yellow. A child, maybe 3 years old, in a high chair. A father, blurry-faced, making a ridiculous, sputtering noise with his lips. The child's face, a canvas of confusion. Then dawning, overwhelming delight. And then it came? A sound that was pure, unformed joy. A giggle that hiccuped into a full-throated, belly-shaking laugh. A laugh so complete it was a universe in itself. The emotion was contagious. Absolute. It held no irony, no past, no future. It was the pure present of delight. Here. This was the instance. This was the raw material. Laughter memory. Cradling its fragile, bubbling light. She felt something else. A tug. A distortion at the very edge of the racial sediment layer. It was not a human memory. It was older, colder, structured differently. A memory that didn't fit the topology of the human mind. Driven by a compunction she didn't understand. Ilara let the laughter memory float. anchored by a thread of her attention, and turned her focus toward the distortion. She pushed past the last layers of human experience into a stratum that felt geologic, alien. The psychic space changed. The water became viscous, slow. The sensations were not emotional, but abstract, geometric. She perceived angles that strained comprehension, pressures that had no earthly analog, and a profound, resonant loneliness that spanned epochs. And then, she touched it. It was a memory map, but not of stars as humanity knew them. It was a map of cosmic structures, of the filamentary web of dark matter, of the great, empty voids between galaxy clusters. It was a navigational chart, but for a journey of perception, not of bodies. Superimposed over it was a message, not in words, but in a complex, layered emission of intent and sorrow. It translated, roughly and painfully, in her mind. We observed your nascent curiosity, your reaching. We too faced the silence. The static that eats information is not a natural phenomenon. It is a quarantine, a filter. You are beginning to remember, and in remembering, you alert the wardens. The dusk you hide within is a thinning veil. Cease your recollection. Embrace the silence, or they will impose it. The message was attached to a sensory signature. The dry, clean scent of ammonia snow on a world with 3 small moons. The whisper of solar wind through crystalline forests. The taste of a cold, metallic nectar, utterly, irrevocably alien. And the warning was clear. The cradle floor, the unraveling, the silence. It was not an accident. It was a policy, a cosmic containment protocol. And their act of remembering, of sculpting reality against the tide, was a violation, a trigger. Ilara recoiled, the psychic shock slamming her back into her body on the resonance slab. She gasped, air burning in lungs that felt foreign. The taste of ammonia snow was still in her mouth. The alien loneliness a cold stone in her chest. The joyous laughter memory was gone, scattered by the shockwave. She stumbled from her quarters, her mind reeling. The Eventide's corridors, usually a place of quiet purpose, felt different. The bone song seemed thinner, more anxious. The self-generated dusk outside the occasional viewport seemed less like a protective blanket and more like a held breath. To Silas in the archive. Words tumbled from her. A fractured report of the alien memory map. The warning, the scent of ammonia. Silas listened, his ancient face unreadable. When she finished, he was silent for a long time. The only sound was the soft, crystalline hum of the memory cubes. The prescribed stratum, he finally whispered, his voice full of dust. You have touched the prescribed stratum. It is forbidden knowledge. The first compact. What compact? Ilara demanded, her fear turning to anger. What are you not telling us? What are the wardens? Quote. Silas looked at her with infinite sadness. The truth, Captain Ilara, is the most unstable memory of all. It is the one sculpture we have never been able to anchor. To know it fully is to risk its collapse. And ours with it. The compact is this. We remember to survive. But we must forget why we must remember. The why is a black hole. It consumes stability. They said we were alerting them. Ilara insisted that our very work is a beacon. Quote. It is, a new voice said from the chamber entrance. It was Kale, the snowflake sculptor. His face was pale, his eyes wide. Behind him stood Lyra and a dozen other senior sculptors. They had felt it too. The ripple in the dusk. The aftershock of her brush with the prescribed stratum. The Council of Echoes has been convened, Cale said, his voice tense. The atrium stability metrics are fluctuating. New anchors are requiring 10 times the focus to hold the old ones. Some are beginning to fray. A cold dread settled in Ilara's stomach. She had done it. She had triggered something. The Council of Echoes was not a physical gathering, but a synaptic confluence. In a dedicated chamber, the senior sculptors lay on their slabs, minds linking, forming a shared consciousness. Ilara, as captain, was the nexus. In the non-space of the confluence, their thoughts swirled like colored smoke, ping sap that is not sap. It is probability foam. The scent of the flower has turned to the scent of ozone and burning wire. The river flows backwards and upwards simultaneously. The math is screaming. The consensus was immediate and terrifying. The eventide's protective dusk was destabilizing. The external pressure, the quarantine force hinted at by the alien memory, was increasing. Their sculpted reality was under direct assault. We must strengthen the anchors. Lyra's thought form flashed. A spear of blue determination. A grand sculpting. We focus all our will, all our memory, on reinforcing what we have. It is a reaction, countered the thought form of an older sculptor named Gavril, a specialist in memory geometry. It treats the symptom. The alien memory implies an external actor. The wardens. Reinforcement may only draw more attention. It is like beating a drum in a silent forest to prove you are quiet. Ilara's own thought pulsed at the center. A steady, troubled gold. We see sculpting. We let the anchors fail. The dusk will collapse. And the floor, or the silence, or the quarantine, whatever it is, will take us. We must understand what we are, Gavril responded. The alien memory called us nascent. It called our reaching curiosity. We have always defined ourselves as refugees. What if we are something else? What if the eventide is not a lifeboat, but a cocoon? Quote, the concept hung in the confluence, luminous and disturbing. A cocoon, a transitional state, the final memory, Ilara thought. The idea coalescing with terrifying clarity. The one in the captain's archive. The sealed one. The memory of the launch. Knew of it. A memory cube of pure black crystal, stored in a shielded niche in the captain's quarters. It was never to be opened. The first compact. It was the memory of the eventide's departure. To open it was forbidden. For it was said to contain a paradox so potent it could unmake their carefully sustained reality. It is the one sculpture we are forbidden to make, Silas's ancient thought voice sighed into their confluence. It is the memory of our own beginning. In a universe where our past is being erased. To firmly anchor our own origin is a logical impossibility. It could create a recursive loop. A reality knot. Ilara thought, her resolution hardening. It could be the one anchor to hold everything. The primal anchor. If we are in a cocoon, then the memory of hatching is not a paradox. It is the only truth that matters. The alien memory said we are remembering. What if the final stage of remembrance is to remember our own purpose not as preservation, but as transformation? Quote, the council was divided. A storm of conflicting thoughts. Fear against hope. Caution against desperation. The decision was forced upon them. A deafening, silent shriek tore through the confluence. It was not sound, but a fundamental data burst of wrongness from the ship's perimeter sensors. In the physical world, alarms remained silent. Sound was too crude, but every sculptor felt it in their bones. The view screens in the quarters and corridors flickered, and for the first time in generations, showed something other than uniform dusk. Outside, the void was changing. Empty black was developing. Textures, vast, indistinct, and terrifyingly geometric shadows moved at the edges of perception. They had no color, no light, only a deeper absence that defined their impossible shapes. Shifting polyhedrons, recursive spirals that threatened to swallow thought. They were folding space-time around the eventide, applying pressure. The wardens, they were here. The bone song of the ship rose to a terrified whine. Across the vessel, anchors began to fail catastrophically. The great oak in the atrium splintered into a million shards of forgotten detail. The snowflake vaporized. The river evaporated. The shared psychic space filled with the silent screams of lost memories. We have no time. Ilara's thought was a command, cutting through the panic. The compact is broken. We enact the final protocol. We sculpt the launch. There was no further debate. Survival was now a choice between two ends. Dissolution by the wardens, or the potential dissolution by a paradox. They chose the paradox. Ilara ran to her quarters, the ship shuddering around her as reality itself was compressed. She went to the shielded niche. The black crystal cube lay within. It felt cold, not physically, but memorically. A cold of absolute zero, of pre-creation. She did not open it in the conventional sense. As a sculptor, she engaged with it. She placed her forehead against its frigid surface and poured her entire consciousness, her captain's authority, and the collective, panicked will of the Eventide's crew into it. The cube activated, and she remembered. It was not a memory of a shipyard, of engines firing, of cheers. It was a memory of unmaking. The Eventide had not been launched from a world. The world, the last fragment of a crumbling reality, had been folded into the Eventide. The launch was not a departure into space. It was a retreat into concept. The creators had taken the dying seed of their universe, its laws, its memories, its potential, and encapsulated it within a shell of desperate theory. The theory of the quantum dusk. They had not built a vessel to escape the flaw. They had built a womb to gestate a new one. The Eventide was not sailing. It was dreaming. And the sculptors were not preserving the past, they were. With every anchored memory, every act of willful remembrance, defining the parameters of a new existence. They were not resisting the silence. They were using the raw materials of the old universe to compose the first notes of a new symphony. It was beautiful and devastating. The Eventide could not logically exist unless the flaw existed to force its creation. But if the flaw was a deliberate quarantine by wardens, then the Eventide's existence was an act of rebellion so profound it was birthing something new. From the act of containment itself, they were a thought the universe tried to suppress. And in suppressing, gave form. The memory was overwhelming. A tsunami of foundational data. It was the ultimate anchor, because it anchored them to nothing but their own potential. It was the memory of beginning. And in remembering it now, at the moment of their apparent end, they were completing the loop. They were making the beginning true by choosing it as their end. Lara stood, the cube now glowing with an inner light. She walked, trance-like, back to the atrium. The other sculptors were there, clinging to their stations as the ship convulsed. The geometric wardens pressed in from the void, their silent pressure causing the very air to crackle with doomed probabilities. She held the cube aloft, not with her hand, but with her mind, with the combined focused will of every soul on the ship. They fed the memory of the launch into the ship's core, into the generator of the quantum dusk. We do not run, Ilara said, her voice echoing in the minds of all. We do not hide. We remember. And in remembering, we choose. They performed the ultimate sculpting. Not of a tree or a laugh, but of a condition. The condition of being not contained. The condition of being new. The unmaking. The folding. The retreat into dream. And they reversed its polarity. They sculpted it not as an end, but as a premise. The premise was, let the silence be the canvas. The eventide shuddered, not with destruction, but with a profound, cosmic unclenching. Outside, the pressing geometric wardens did not attack. They hesitated. Their function was to enforce the quarantine, to eliminate anomalous, remembering data structures that threatened the sterile stability of the post-silence cosmos. But the eventide was no longer just data. It was no longer an anomaly hiding in a dusk. It was becoming an axiom. Protective dusk around the ship didn't shatter. It unfolded. Like a flower. Or a mind waking? It expanded. Not into space, but into a new ontological layer. The black crystal cube dissolved into a shower of light that was also sound, that was also the scent of ammonia, snow, and ancient nectar. The alien memory, now integrated, understood not as a warning, but as an invitation from a fellow dreamer who had failed long ago. The wardens recoiled. They could not crush an axiom. They could only exist in a universe of fixed rules. And the eventide was now writing a new rule. Here, memory begets reality. The ship did not move to a new location in the old cosmos. The old cosmos, for a radius of billions of years around them, simply ceased to be the relevant framework. The relentless, flattening silence, the quarantine field, met the expanding sphere of their sculpted premise and was transformed by it. The static became potential. The void became pristine, undifferentiated possibility. Shuddering stopped. The bone song faded into a deep, resonant peace. The atrium was silent. The sculpted forest of memories was gone. Not destroyed, but released. Its components returned to the potential pool. On the main view screen, the terrifying geometric wardens were gone. In their place was nothing. A profound, clean, luminous nothing. Not an empty black, but a glowing, featureless white. A blank page. A fresh canvas, vibrating with quiet potential. Ilara lowered her hand. The psychic link of the council dissolved, leaving each sculptor in their own mind, breathless, awestruck, and utterly changed. They had done it. They had not found a new world. They had not defeated an enemy. They had performed the final, forgotten act of their voyage. They had remembered how to stop being a refugee, and in doing so, had become a creator. His steps firmer. The milky cast was gone from his eyes, replaced by a clear, childlike wonder as he gazed at the white void on the screen. The canvas, he whispered. Ilara nodded. Exhaustion and a soaring, terrifying joy mixing in her veins. The first memory of the new universe, she said, her voice soft but carrying through the silent atrium, will not be of loss or of flight. She looked at her fellow sculptors, their faces etched with the same awe. It will be of laughter. She closed her eyes, and with the ease of a breath, summoned the memory she had lost. The child's laugh in the warm, yellow kitchen. She did not sculpt it as an anchor. She offered it as a first brushstroke. A simple, joyous, foundational truth. Somewhere in the luminous, waiting nothing outside. A new kind of light, warm and yellow, kindled into being. The eventide's long dusk was over. Its morning had finally come.